Mortal Kombat 1 is here with a whole new story, new modes, and awesome graphics if you're not on the Switch. I can't tell you what it's like for experienced fighting game players because I'm not one. If you are, let us know your thoughts and tips in the comments, but I can tell you how I found it as a fighting game noob. Unfortunately, I do feel the beginner experience is worse in one crucial respect compared to the previous game in the series, but I'll get to that later. Let's start with some positives. Many newcomers will benefit from the thorough tutorial. It covers the basics of movement through to important topics common to all fighting games like frame data, as well as game-specific mechanics like the new cameo system. You can drop in and out of different bits and replay anything you want to go over again at a later date without having to play through the whole tutorial. It keeps great features from Mortal Kombat 11, including helpful visualizations of the timing needed for certain inputs. During demonstrations, you can see an on-screen controller with the buttons lighting up when the inputs should be pressed. As in the previous game, you can practice the inputs while watching the demonstration, and your button presses will show up in a different color from the demo presses. This is a really nice feature for practicing timing, which is important in all fighting games and can be unintuitive for those more used to other genres. Thanks to Go Low for pointing that feature out in the comments of my video about Mortal Kombat 11. If you can get your head around everything that the tutorial covers, that will be a real leg up in your fighting game learning journey. However, despite retaining some great features including practice fights after every few parts of the tutorial, like most games tutorials, it is still a pretty dry way to learn, so you might want to jump straight into the story. This campaign plays out like a TV series with amazing graphics and top-notch animation. I love this about the Mortal Kombat games. It's way more story than you get from most games in the genre. Finding a character you connect with can be super important to keep a beginner engaged with the fighting game through the difficult early learning stages, and MK's story helps enormously by fleshing out the characters' backgrounds, motivations, and personalities, as well as letting you try most of the cast out in the fights you take part in throughout the plot. After playing through the story, almost any player will have found at least one character they want to spend more time with. Many games in other genres don't have a separate story mode. The game is the story. Often there isn't a distinct tutorial either. You learn the game in the early stages as mechanics are gradually introduced and then reinforced as you use them until you have got your head around all the tools in your arsenal. This can be more fun and engaging than a normal tutorial. You don't feel like you're studying, you're just playing a game. It might also be a more effective way of teaching. Pocket Bravery, a recent indie fighting game, attempts this in its story, and this approach is present in Street Fighter 6's World Tour mode too. MK1 doesn't go nearly as far as those two games, but there are elements of this mindset which might make it less overwhelming for the newcomer out of the gate. For example, your first couple of fights are the classic one-on-one without the cameo mechanic. This new feature means you normally have two characters to play with, your main character and a secondary cameo character who you can occasionally call upon to jump in and do something in a fight. It might feel daunting for the newcomer to have to choose and get their head around two characters, but it's actually very approachable. The cameos all use more or less the same inputs and can be considered roughly similar for the new player. As your understanding of the game develops though, you will find that the differences between the cameo characters adds a lot of depth to the game. It effectively means each character in the main roster has over a dozen variations to experiment with. Playing through the various chapters of the story and other modes, you will find that you unlock stuff which could be a character or cameo to play with, but is usually cosmetics to customize your main's appearance. This is mostly ignorable if you don't care, but I like that it adds an alternative type of progression. Even if you aren't bothered about getting better at the game and winning online, you can have something to work towards, whether that's completing the full collection or just getting that one pair of sunglasses you really want for Johnny Cage. The other main single player modes kind of assume you know what happens in the story, so play the story through first if you want to have a pure unspoilered experience. Once you've done that, Invasions is a unique single player mode that will evolve over time. It works a bit like a board game. You move between fixed points, take part in fights, and find items and power-ups, even leveling up and assigning stat points to your character like in an RPG. Some fights you come across will have unique modifiers to make them more difficult, but you can also find or buy, using in-game currency, items and modifiers to help you out. A nice way to let the player set their own difficulty for a fight without explicitly using difficulty levels in this mode. Another cool feature that is perfect for beginners is the occasional level that gets you to practice something useful in the game out of the context of a fight, like this one about jumping over and ducking projectiles. Invasions is a different way to play the game and will apparently refresh every 6 weeks with a new layout and new rewards. This will add variety and longevity to the single player experience. One unique element of the Invasions mode is that every fighter and every attack has 1 or 2 elemental types. Think Pokemon, with lightning moves doing more damage against ice type fighters and so on. This encourages the player to change fighter as they move around the map and face different opponents of different types. The first parts of Invasion do a good job of gradually introducing the mode's unique features and mechanics, which is great for newcomers. The Towers mode offers the classic fighting game single player experience of facing a sequence of opponents. There are story style towers which unlock an extra nugget of narrative for each character you finish them with, another thing for the completionist to work towards, or you can just find out a bit more about your favourite character if you didn't get enough of them in the story. The Endless Tower challenges you to beat as many enemies in a row as you can, good for those with high score fever, and the Survivor mode works the same as Endless, but you don't regenerate health between matches. Good defense is key here. These towers are fun to play through, and also a good way for noobs to get to grips with a character's moveset through single player gameplay. Once you've found a character you like, you might decide to jump online for some multiplayer. King of the Hill makes a return, a mode where you join a lobby and wait for your turn to take on the player who is currently on a winning streak. If you beat them, you take over as King of the Hill and take on the next opponent. While waiting, you can watch the matches in progress. This is a great way for a beginner player to see gameplay from other players of various skill levels playing different characters. You can even keep an eye on what approach the current King of the Hill likes to take and think about how you might combat it when your turn comes. The ranked mode tries to pair you with opponents of the same skill level as you. Mortal Kombat has a huge advantage in this respect over many fighting games, as it is just so popular. Any time of day, there are likely to be plenty of people of various skill levels looking for matches online, so you should never have to wait around for ages to get a match. Despite this attempt to match players of similar skill levels, don't be discouraged if you lose a lot at first. This is normal. Try not to focus on winning as the only outcome that you care about in a match. Give yourself little goals like landing a particular combo or reacting quickly enough to hit your opponent out of the air when they jump at you. You'll notice yourself getting better at these things, and that will help you start to win. The first thing is to make sure you know the inputs for your character's main special moves and some simple combos, maybe by playing through some towers with them first to practice. Speaking of learning your character's inputs, this is where the developers have made a decision I simply do not understand. They removed a really useful feature that was in MK11, the ability to pin special move inputs and combos to the screen. Is that going to make the difference long term for the player trying to get good at Mortal Kombat? No, it's a bit of a crutch, and in the long run you are going to have to get those inputs into both your memories, brain and muscle. What I really miss about it is how fluid it made single player in the first several hours of playing the game. MK1 encourages you to explore different characters, whether that's through the story moving between the characters or Invasion mode's elemental system. This is great. Exploring the cast means the new player is more likely to end up trying a character that really clicks with them, but it also means that just when you've started to remember which special move has which input and how to execute a combo or two, you switch to a character where none of that applies. Pinning the inputs to the screen meant you had that instant reference. At the start of the first round with a character, you could pin some inputs, and then you can play the whole match without having to go back to the move list. In MK1, I find myself pausing several times every match to remind myself what is what. Or if I don't bother reminding myself because I just want to play, I make more unintentional moves where I get the inputs wrong. This feeling of lacking control, intending to do one thing but seeing your on-screen avatar do something else, is one of the most frustrating aspects of being a fighting game beginner, and MK11's system really helped smooth that over. It's baffling to me that this has been removed in MK1. The result is a story mode that is accessible to beginners. You can jump straight in and have hours of fun even if you've never played a fighting game before, partly thanks to the generous difficulty options. But spending that time in the story will help you to learn and develop as a fighting game player, or just as a Mortal Kombat player, much less than it could have done, and less than the previous game did. This might not matter to some players who are simply happy to enjoy the story, other single player modes, and unlocking all the content, which is great. If that's the case for you, there's loads for you to do in this game. But the developers have not gone out of their way to support beginners who do want to get to the point of playing competitively online and feel the satisfaction of honing their skills and seeing gradual improvement. Is this a deal breaker? Absolutely not. The total beginner can still learn to get good at this game. It just might take a bit longer and involve a bit more time on YouTube and asking advice on Discord. I'm just disappointed because in a year where Street Fighter 6 felt like a massive step forward for learner content in fighting games, I was expecting Mortal Kombat to rise to that challenge, and instead it feels slightly worse for beginners than the prior game in the series. There were other improvements that could have been made, for example to the move list, but weren't. It shows frame data and damage for each move, which is great, but doesn't explain what non-damaging moves do. The good news is that it would only take a couple of tweaks to undo this backward step and put it back on par with Mortal Kombat 11 in this regard. We all know that these days the game you play on release is far from the finished product, so here's hoping NetherRealm Studios might at least add back the ability to pin inputs in an update sometime soon. One way that the devs did step up for this game was in accessibility options. The first thing I saw when I booted the game was a screen reader asking whether I wanted to keep the screen reader option on, and there are more accessibility options in the menu. They have put a lot of effort into making the game work for both visually impaired and hearing impaired gamers, with a lot of flexibility in these settings. Fighting games should be playable for everyone, and I'm really happy that NRS are taking steps to make that possible. Play what looks cool to you. Play what your friends want to play. And if you want to play a very fun game with great mechanics that add depth in an approachable way and fantastic graphics if you're not on Switch, a huge online community, and loads to do even if you never venture online, play Mortal Kombat 1. Or, if you want most of what's great about MK1 but with slightly better learning tools and probably a lot cheaper, Mortal Kombat 11 is definitely still worth picking up for the beginner. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos looking at fighting games through the eyes of a beginner. I have one on Mortal Kombat 11 and a video looking at 6 different games I've seen widely recommended to fighting game beginners, so that might be a good place to start.